So this is the screencast for Ms. Turner's AP Psych class, Unit 6, Motivation, Emotions, and Stress. So there are several people that you need to know what they did, who are they, what theory they're connected to. Clark Hall, remember he is drive reduction. Clark has to overhaul his car in order to drive somewhere. Abraham Maslow with his hierarchy starts with physical and then goes to safety, then belonging, then esteem, then self-actualization, and then self-transcendence. Masters and Johnson were the first people to study sex in the lab. William McDougall is a part of the instinct theory. He said instincts have to be innate, and there are 18 of them, not the thousands that people were trying to name. Kinsey was another sex researcher. He was really the first, but he didn't do it in a lab. He did it via a survey, and there was lots of criticisms with how he did this, so make sure you're aware of those. And then Yerkes-Dodson relates to the arousal theory and how we want to have flow, being comfortably challenged and appropriately aroused or motivated. And then Paul Ekman, remember, ek, like I make a bad face, ek. And so he looked at the micro expressions and also the differences between cultures. So theories of motivation. Motives, anything that cause you to do something. The 5 theories, and these were on the white wall for a while, but instinct, drive, incentive, arousal, and humanistic. Pretty easy to overlap. You have the Doreen and Rochelle examples in your binder, a little matching section. I think that was on page, I want to say page 5. So which one of those theories looks at the biological patterns? Well, instinct is completely biological, and the other ones, except for incentive, are at least partially biological. Which one compares task difficulty to excitement levels? That would be the arousal. Involves intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. What do you think that would be? Pairs balance to homeostasis. Okay, we're limiting them, so you should be able to find that answer. And it's based on the hierarchy of needs. Pretty easy to answer that one. Motivation, distinguishing among or between primary drives and secondary drives. Remember, that's like primary and secondary reinforcers. Excuse me. Instinct. Sorry for the repeat, but have to be innate patterns. And McDougall said there are 18 for humans. And so an example would be like seeking shelter. We had William James who would say that would be things like nurturing, compassion, love. Those are human instincts. Fixed action patterns, on the other hand, are species specific. And humans don't have fixed action patterns, but other species do. The expectancy value theory, if I expect something to pay off, like watching a screencast, then I am likely to engage in that behavior. And over justification, I move from intrinsic to extrinsic. That's a review. And then the levels of Maslow's hierarchy, I mentioned those earlier, but there are 6 levels, although I really doubt you'll have to know self-transcendence. And lastly, the arousal level, how it connects not only to motivation, which I mentioned earlier, but also once we are aroused, once we're revved up, that can spill over into other emotions. So if I come from the gym and I'm all motivated, and then I come out and see that somebody's keyed my car, I'm even more ticked off than I would normally be because I'm already aroused. The major drives, you guys shared notes on these. So hunger, where is it controlled and what part of the brain? Remember, there are 2 parts. The answer is hypothalamus, but there will be the ventromedial as well as the lateral. So make sure you know what happens when these parts of the brains are either stimulated or lesioned and deprived. Internal aspects that you were to learn about, the set point, what our body's ideal weight is, not media's ideal weight, our body's ideal weight, metabolic rate, how fast you burn calories, the connection between glucose, insulin, and the negative feedback with hunger. And so if my glucose is low, I'm hungry, so I eat something. and that gives me glucose. And then my body responds by producing insulin to reduce my glucose level. Satiety, feeling full, and so hopefully not eating. Sex was another major drive. This is the second time we've had primary versus secondary sexual characteristics. Primary obviously needed to procreate. The brain parts for sex, once again, that hypothalamus with the 5 F's. The master gland, which would be the pituitary gland, obviously important, and pheromones. Again, this is the second time we've had pheromones, and so keeping people with identical or very close immune systems from having children. Sexual orientation, there were some differences again in cell size within the hypothalamus, so make sure you look at that. And then the 4 stages of the sex response cycle. And remember that only men, even though we all have the resolution period, both men and women, only men have the refractory period. So that's a key difference. That's within the resolution part. More major drives, aggression. We had several brain parts, mostly from the limbic system. So make sure you know the distinction between the amygdala and, once again, the hypothalamus. Environmental factors like overcrowding and hot temperatures and make us more aggressive. Psychological factors, the 2 principles for aggression, the frustration principle, I'm upset because something is blocking my way, or the instrumental principle, I'm going to be aggressive because I've been rewarded for being aggressive in the past. And then the genetics that are involved, such as the warrior gene, which is really genes, but how there might be genetic predisposition for some people to be more aggressive, and along with that, adoption studies. Achievement, wow, reward centers of the brain. Bet you can't guess what part of the brain this is in. I hope you can. Achievement motivation, the differences between people. This is kind of like the arousal level as well. Some people have very high need to achieve things. They look forward to a challenging task. Other people with low achievement motivation, they don't want a challenge. They just want to get through it. So look at some of those specifics in your notes. The idea of flow, once again, where I'm comfortably challenged and perfectly motivated. And the subfields that tied into achievement, such as human factors, which is part of IO psychology. And then as far as managers go and how they view people, theory X, my employees are extrinsically motivated, or theory Y, my workers are intrinsically motivated. Moving on to emotions. Make sure when you can also look at these theories of emotions, which you made posters on as well. So 2 physiological, they're only looking at physiological, and so they don't bring the cognitive part in yet. And so they make sure you name the emotion and you don't just say arousal. So like the emotion comes at the same time or the emotion lags behind. So which is which? The 4 that do have the cognitive component, Schachter 2-factor was the first one, and then Schachter and Singer, which kind of go together, which is again the emotional spillover. Zions and his delayed cognition, that cognition is catching up with it, and Lazarus with the 3 types of cognitive appraisals of what's going on, what can I do about it, and then what? So those are the 3 appraisals. And then finally the biological side, where we just have the opponent process, just like it was in vision, where something is stimulated and then the opposite hangs around a little bit. Well, same thing with emotions. Key concepts, universal versus cultural differences in body language, facial expressions, and once again we have Paul Ekman's rules, and so that should be a pretty easy thing to review. The 2-dimension theory, where typically we just have a matrix and all we're doing is locating that in either high or low arousal or positive or negative valence, so the 4 quadrants there. Nervous system, which branches? I have sympathy for someone who's so aroused that they must run away. Make sure you know those. Gender differences in expressions, and that also comes from your, how they, not your reading, but how you read expressions in other people as far as, who's good at reading other people's emotions, who expresses anger more often. Could be definitely a cultural difference there as well. Catharsis. If I'm upset and I beat up a dummy, does that really calm me down? If I see somebody else beat up a dummy, does that really calm me down? No. Positive psychology, the role of how to deal with emotions like resilience, how to help people have positive emotional experiences. The feel good, do good phenomenon. If I feel good with the time when I grade your test, then I'll give you better grades. Just kidding. You get the grades you get. But anyway, if we feel good, we're more likely to help other people, be altruistic. And the adaptation level phenomenon, when we look at our emotions and how we can adapt to, if something really, really good happens, how do we feel? It's only good for so long, and then our emotions tend to go back to the normal level. And then relative deprivation, I might feel bad, but if I compare myself to someone who's worse off, I feel better. Or I might feel okay, but if I compare myself to someone who's better off, I don't feel so good. Stress, that's always comes from your personal appraisal. Is it a challenge? Is it a barrier? We have the physiological responses of fight or flight. Again, we've got that nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system parts. We've got the hormones of cortisol and adrenaline that are emitted. We have Cellier's idea of the general adaptation syndrome, which are you out of gas, alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. We have Friedman and Roseman's longitudinal study on heart attack and stress. And so type A, type B ideas. Oh, there it is. And then what happens to the lymphocytes when we are stressed for a long time, what that does to our immune system. And the three categories of events. Is it a daily hassle? Is it a catastrophe? What's going on and which one causes more stress? Which of the three, types of conflict. Approach, avoidance, avoidance, multiple approach avoidance. Know the number of options. We spent time in class talking about this. If it's approach, I have to have two options. If it's approach avoidance, it's one option with both a good side and a bad side. So please review those. This is something frequently missed in the FRQs. And again, which one of those types of conflicts is most stressful? When stress is controllable or not. Obviously, when we feel we have more control, then we can take a hold of our stress. And then coping mechanisms. We did a teeter-totter graphic organizer in class. And so some of them were healthy, some of them were not healthy. I think your common sense can tell you a lot about that. And finally, for the FRQ prep, page 22, I hope that's the right page number, is good for application practice. We have the emotion posters that were still up in the classroom. Make sure you can name and distinguish those theories of emotion and motivation, types of conflicts, Cellier, and research. Okay, so that's everything. Good luck, study hard. I know you'll do great.